Trevor here, and I got you the most shocking things Bigfoot did on camera. From a wildlife biologist whose trail cameras captured Bigfoot's pattern of behavior that suggests phenomenal intelligence, to a logger who accidentally films a moonlit clearing where Bigfoot brutally fights a huge cryptid. The trail camera activates at 6:31 p.m. on April 12, 2026. The sensor does not trip because of wind, or a deer, or shifting light. It trips because something heavy strikes the ground nearby. The impact transmitted through the root system of the tree the mount is bolted to, traveling up through wood and steel and plastic, vibrating the lens before a single frame has been recorded. The camera is already shaking when it powers on. That is where this story begins. Not with Bigfoot in frame, not yet, but with the Earth announcing that Bigfoot is close. I have looked at hundreds of trail camera deployments. I know what shakes one and what does not. Trail cameras are engineered to sit motionless through rain and the ordinary vibrations of forest life. What shakes one is a force large enough to travel through the root network itself, up through the trunk, through the steel of the mount, and arrive at the lens before anything is in frame. The seismological team I brought in estimates the ground strike occurred within 40 feet of the tree, produced by something moving above 800 pounds. When I saw that number, I sat with it for a long time. Bigfoot was at full stride when the Earth started talking. The first 3 frames are motion blur, consistent with a large ground strike event nearby, which I confirmed with the investigators. The blur resolves in frame 4. Darren Vasquez enters the frame at a full sprint. He does not jog into the shot. He does not appear around a corner at a moderate pace. He erupts into the left edge of the frame, already at maximum velocity, already leaning hard into his stride, already past the point where controlled retreat is distinguishable from panicked flight. His rifle is in both hands but carrying wrong, not shouldered, not ready, swinging with each stride like ballast rather than a weapon. I have reviewed footage of hunters, of people in distress, of people running from things they have encountered in the field. A man who raised that rifle with intent does not run the way Darren is running. A man raises a rifle when he believes it will help. Darren's rifle is in his hands because he has not had a spare second to put it down. His mouth is moving. The audio resolves it 4 seconds into the footage. He is saying, "Bigfoot," not asking, not exclaiming, saying it the way you say the name of something you have just confirmed. Identified past doubt, identified in the worst possible way. And the confirmation has made everything worse rather than better. I have heard people say a lot of things on footage I have reviewed. I have never heard someone say a word the way Darren says that one. He says Bigfoot and then he runs faster. 3 seconds after Darren clears the frame, a rock the size of a human head strikes the cedar tree directly beside where he was standing. That rock was thrown, not rolled, not dislodged by something moving past. The entry angle documents a horizontal trajectory fast enough to penetrate 4.5 inches of live cedar from a direction that places the origin point behind and to the left of where Darren was running. I brought in a structural materials consultant to look at the impact photographs. Something picked up a rock the size of a human head and threw it with enough force to embed it in a tree while running. I want you to sit with that the same way I had to sit with it. The investigators spend 4 days cataloging what follows along this trail. The rocks are embedded in the trees, not resting against them, not lodged in bark. Embedded, driven into the wood with a force that requires tools not to pry them loose, but to cut into the surrounding tissue and physically remove them. One rock penetrates a cedar trunk 4.5 inches deep. The compression point is circular and clean, surrounded by a blast pattern of radiating fractures moving outward through the grain of the wood like a shockwave frozen in time. The structural materials consultant who examined photographs of this impact gives a force estimate that is not achievable by a human being. Not a strong one, not. With a running start, not under any condition. That is not my conclusion, that is his in writing, attached to the formal report. But here is what the physical record tells us beyond raw force. These rocks were thrown while something was running, while closing distance on a sprinting adult male, while tracking through dense old-growth terrain that requires active navigation. And the impacts are not random. The investigators map 7 strike sites in the first 200 meters. The first 2 land at ground level, root systems, displaced soil. The third and fourth climb to waist height on the flagged trees. The fifth and sixth hit chest height. The seventh, the cedar with the embedded rock, lands at shoulder height on a 6-foot adult male. The throws are climbing, adjusting between each one, calibrating with patience towards something moving at speed ahead of it, walking the point of impact upward toward a running man's center of mass as the distance closes with every stride. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say that is not reactive behavior. I have spent a long time studying what reactive behavior looks like. The footprint of a startled animal, the scatter pattern of something throwing blindly in all directions and hoping for contact. That is not what this is. This is targeting. This is something finding its range in real time, between throws, adjusting with each release while moving through terrain at a speed a sprinting adult male cannot match. If you have never considered what it means for something to be patient, not wild, not reactive, not afraid, this is where that consideration begins for me, and I have thought about very little else since I first looked at this evidence. Patience requires the knowledge that time is on your side, that each throw can be more calibrated than the last because there will be a last throw, and it will land where it is supposed to land. The trail camera network in this section is maintained by a wildlife monitoring program, and the second unit catches what the first one missed. Not a shape between trees, not a shadow, not a blurred mass that might be interpreted as something large and upright by someone who wants to see it that way. I have seen every version of that footage, and this is not that. Bigfoot enters the frame for 2 full seconds, moving through a gap between 2 old-growth firs, fully exposed, fully lit by the remaining ambient light of 6:31 p.m. in April, visible from head to mid-torso before the gap closes and the tree line swallows the shape again. The monitoring program has GPS data on every tree in this camera's field of view, every trunk diameter on record, every branch height logged. I worked with the analysts who used that data to establish scale, and I watched them run those numbers multiple times because none of us were comfortable with where they landed the first time. The numbers come out the same way every time. Shoulder height clears 8 feet. Shoulder width falls between 28 and 32 inches. Arms hanging substantially longer than human proportions. Hands brushing vegetation at mid-trunk height on surrounding trees without any downward reach at all. The reference points are fixed, and what moves through them is what it is. We are not measuring something we want to find. We are measuring something the environment forced us to measure because the math is what it is. Here is what those 2 seconds also show. Bigfoot is not sprinting. The gait is long and economical, the stride of something built for sustained progress rather than explosive effort. That stride covers roughly 10 feet per step. Darren, at full sprint, covers approximately 5. In those 2 seconds, Bigfoot's head stays completely level. No bobbing, no lateral sway. The head stays level the way a very large predator keeps it level, not because the terrain is easy, but because the body beneath it has solved the terrain without asking the head to help. Eyes visible in the grainy footage across the distance, not moving from the direction Darren went. Bigfoot is not running. Bigfoot is following, at a pace that makes running irrelevant. At 6:43 p.m., established through shadow angle analysis, cross-referenced with trail cam timestamps, Darren turns and fires. He fires 11 times. The investigators recovered 11 casings along the corridor. The ejection patterns are mapped. Each casing, photographed in place before collection, each arc extrapolated backward to reconstruct his position and orientation at the moment of each shot. The reconstruction is clear. Darren never stopped moving, not for a single one of those 11 rounds. He fired with his legs still driving, his body still destabilizing with each stride, his weight already committed to forward motion, because stopping, even for a fraction of a second to get a clean sight picture, was not something he could afford. 3 of the 11 rounds strike trees in the direction he was firing, all 3 angled upward. He was not firing high in panic. I want to be clear about that because I know it is the first thing people reach for. He was aiming at something that required him to angle upward to reach it, something tall enough that a man firing backward at a full sprint still needed to compensate for its height to put rounds anywhere near center mass. Bigfoot did not slow down. The casing pattern makes clear that Darren understood partway through those shots that the rifle was not working. The spacing between casings changes in the final 3. Gaps widen. The arc shifts. The rhythm of a person still pulling the trigger because stopping feels worse than continuing, but who no longer believes it matters. 11 rounds. Absorbed. Not slowing by a stride. Coming. The forest answers immediately. A rock strikes a tree directly above where Darren's last casing was found within seconds of his final shot. Bark blasting outward in a star pattern, wood fibers radiating from a central point in all directions, thrown while Darren was still pulling the trigger, while the gap between them had collapsed to something the investigators later estimate at less than 30 feet. At that distance, this is not pursuit anymore. This is arrival. A research team reaches the trail corridor 48 hours after the incident. They are there because a regional forestry database flagged this section as anomalous, ground disturbance inconsistent with documented wildlife activity, reviewed by a forestry technician who escalated it because something about the flag did not match any category in her reference list. She did not know what she was escalating. Neither did the research team when they arrived. I know what it is like to follow a data flag into a forest and have the forest give you something your reference list does not contain. I have never experienced it at this scale. Nothing about following a database flag prepares anyone for what this trail gives them. They find the tracks, not vague depressions that require imagination to interpret. I have seen those. I have debunked hundreds of them. Clear, full, deeply pressed footprints, and in the mud near the creek crossing, through organic material soft enough to capture fine detail. Those prints resolve into something the analysis team spends 6 hours documenting. Toe spread, arch geometry, heel depth, weight distribution, all of it preserved with a clarity the lead researcher describes in her notes as unrepeated in her career. I read those notes. I understand what she means. Casts are made. Measurements are recorded. The prints average 21 inches in length and 9.5 inches across the ball of the foot. The stride length between consecutive prints from the same foot is 8 feet, 4 inches. The biomechanics team arrives at a height estimate consistent with what the trail cameras established, between 8.5 and 9 feet, moving at a sustained pace a sprinting human cannot match. But here is the detail the researchers stop at, the one that changes the character of the evidence from documentation of presence to documentation of intention. The depth of the impressions varies, not randomly, systematically. In the areas where the trail damage places the origin points of the thrown rocks, the impressions are deeper on the throwing side. The weight is shifted, planting the foot harder on the throwing side during each release, transferring force through a rotational movement the way any body does when it is putting everything it has into something that leaves its hand. The footprints are not just proof of presence. They are proof of coordination, of deliberate, controlled physical action executed with precision at speed in difficult terrain. The lead researcher, 22 years in wildlife biology, attaches a personal note to the formal report. The note says, "I do not know what made these tracks, but I know what didn't. I have read that sentence more times than I can count. I know exactly what she means. I have been saying a version of it to myself since I first looked at this evidence." The trail camera network ends at the ravine. There is no footage of the approach, no coverage of the transition from the trail corridor to what happens at the edge of the drop. What the physical evidence documents instead is an end point, and the end point is violent in a way that is specific and legible and not open to the usual alternative explanations. Darren's rifle is found in the ravine zone, forced apart, not dropped, not lost in a fall, not left behind when a sling gave way. The receiver is separated from the stock in a way inconsistent with impact damage. The fracture surfaces tell a different story. Compression and torsion applied simultaneously to both ends until the components separated. Something gripped both ends and applied opposing force until it was no longer a weapon. I have looked at photographs of those fracture surfaces for a long time. I understand the physics of what it takes to do that. One of his boots is found driven heel first into the mud nearby, deep enough that recovery requires deliberate effort. He did not step out of it. The geometry, full heel, full weight, pressed 6 inches into compacted soil, is the geometry of a boot still on a foot when the person wearing it was lifted. The heel stayed because the earth held it. The laces were not strong enough to hold Darren inside it once something was pulling him upward. The heel stayed. Darren did not. A holster impression in the mud at the ravine's edge, left hip, consistent with a compact sidearm, is empty. His department equipment log confirms he carried a reserve pistol. The holster is there, pressed into the mud at the rim. He reached for it at the edge. He drew it. That decision is the last one the physical evidence can confirm before the final camera takes over. the final trail camera in the network, sits just past the rim. Its footage is unstable from the first frame. A persistent low vibration, a subtle blur affecting every second of recording, because the ground beneath the mount is no longer entirely stable. Something nearby has changed its relationship with the soil. The camera is shaking the way the first one shook before Darren was in frame, when the ground strike came through the roots before anything was visible. I recognized it immediately when I saw it. The earth is announcing something again. Darren is on the ground when he enters the frame. Not running, not walking, crawling backward on one hand, his other arm reaching behind him for purchase in the soft earth at the ravine's edge. His body low and moving slowly, the way a body moves when every remaining instinct is competing. The instinct to run, fighting the instinct to not look away from what is coming, neither one winning. His face is visible for the first 3 seconds, and what is on his face is not panic. What is on Darren's face is something past panic. The expression that arrives when the options are gone and the body has accepted that they are gone and has stopped pretending. There is a clarity there, the kind that arrives when everything else has been stripped away, and it is one of the most specific and recognizable things the human face can produce. I have watched those 3 seconds more times than I should have. The tree line moves. The whole edge of the forest shifts. Not a branch, not a section of canopy responding to wind, the whole visible edge of the tree line in the frame. And a dark seam opens between 2 ancient pines, and then Bigfoot steps fully into the frame. Not partially, not as a silhouette between branches that requires the viewer to decide what they are seeing. I need to be clear about that because I have made my career on the difference. Bigfoot is in the open, fully exposed, crossing from the darkness of the forest into the ambient light of the clearing at the ravine's edge. And the scale is immediate. It registers before analysis. Before I had run a single measurement, before I had pulled a single reference point, I understood what I was looking at. Bigfoot's shoulders sit above the lowest branches of the surrounding understory. Each step compresses the earth visibly, debris pushing outward. From each footfall in a shockwave radiating through loose soil and leaf litter, moving forward without hesitation. No pause at the tree line to assess what is in the open. No warning display. No vocalization. No behavior that signals aggression building toward action before action arrives. Just forward motion, continuous, unhurried, the movement of something that made its decision long before this moment and is now simply following through on it. Each stride covers 10 feet of ground. Each stride brings the distance down, eyes visible in the grainy footage across the clearing, not leaving Darren. Darren raises his left arm. His hand opens, his fingers spread wide. It is not a fighting posture. It is not surrender in any formal sense. It is something between those two things, a reflex maybe, or the last gesture a body makes when every other action has been exhausted and the body still needs to do something with what remains. I have watched that gesture 100 times. I do not have a better word for it than what it is. Bigfoot does not stop. The camera is about to lose its angle, but the physical evidence at the ravine site fills every gap the footage cannot hold. Darren's left boot print, the boot that stayed on his foot through the entire length of the chase, through the full sprint, through 11 fired rounds, through the last stretch of trail before the ravine, is found heel first in the mud at the rim, 6 inches deep, full weight, full impression, and then nothing, no further footprints ahead of it. No drag marks, no scuff patterns from a crawl or a scramble, just the single boot print and then the absence of any further ground contact on this side of the drop. He did not walk to the edge. He did not crawl to the edge. He was at the edge and then he was above it. The tilted camera, its mount struck by one of the thrown rocks earlier in the corridor running at a compromised angle, catches 3 seconds of what follows. The angle is wrong and the blur is persistent, but Darren's legs are visible in the lower portion of the frame, hanging against the open air above the ravine, not thrashing, not kicking. Still in the way that is not unconsciousness but focus, the stillness of a person doing something specific and deliberate with the last resource they have available. 2 shots, a pause of less than a second, not hesitation, not uncertainty, repositioning, finding a better angle with what is available. Then a third. The first 2 shells are recovered from the ravine floor 30 feet below. Their trajectories are consistent with rounds fired upward at steep angle from well below the shooter's own eye level, fired from a position where the shooter's back was toward the drop and the barrel was angled upward into whatever was above him, braced against whatever surface was available, braced against Bigfoot. The third shell is never found on the ravine floor. The camera catches a change in the silhouette above Darren in the half second after the third shot. The arm holding him does not retract cleanly. It does not pull back the way a deliberate movement does. It drops, sudden and lateral, the way a load-bearing support gives way, rather than the way a deliberate release happens. Darren goes over the ravine edge, not thrown, but falling, released, the grip simply gone all at once. The sound the audio preserves in the next 2 frames is not a scream. It is wind, just the sound of a body moving fast through open air above a 30-foot drop. Then the camera, still running on its broken mount, still tilted toward canopy and open sky, catches what happens at the rim. Bigfoot comes down, not controlled, not settling into a deliberate crouch or a managed lowering. The shape in the tilted frame drops hard to the ground at the rim, and the whole camera vibrates with the impact. The mount, the tree, the root system transmitting the weight of something very large hitting the earth without fully catching itself. Bigfoot's legs fold, then straighten, then fold again in a way that carries the character of both a crouch and a collapse at once. Bigfoot's body pitches forward once, rights itself with an effort that is visible even through the blur, and then does not right itself again. Bigfoot goes still. A pool forms in the mud at the rim, dark, saturated, 3 feet across. The forensic report confirms the staining is biological in origin. It is not Darren's blood. Darren went over the rim before this pool formed. It is not from any documented North American species. The species identification field reads, unknown. I have read a lot of forensic reports. I have never read one with that entry in that field. 3 shots, fired from below, braced against Bigfoot's own body, while Bigfoot held him suspended over a 30-foot drop. 11 rifle rounds from distance, from a man on his feet with time to aim, had done nothing. Had not slowed the pursuit by a single stride, had not produced any visible effect, had not changed anything about what was coming toward Darren across that forest. 3 rounds from inside the grip did what 11 from outside could not. He found it from inside. The experts who analyzed this footage alongside me, wildlife biologists, structural consultants, forensic technicians, the seismological team, the biomechanics team, do not call what we reviewed inconclusive. I will speak for myself, and I will say what the others have said in their own reports and their own words. The footage is what it is. The physical record is what it is. The blood at the rim is biological, unknown, and present in volume not consistent with a surface wound. It is the volume of something that went down and did not get back up on its own, and then we go quiet. In our reports, in our recorded interviews, in the notes attached outside the formal documentation, I know what my own quiet sounds like, and I recognize it in the others. The quiet of people who followed evidence to a conclusion they were not prepared for. That is what we said, not only in words, but in the silence before and after the words, in the pause each of us took before we said what the record required us to say. Darren's body is recovered 4 miles downriver, 2 days later, found in the shallows at a river bend, face up, in 6 inches of moving water. The injuries are consistent with a significant fall, followed by downstream transport. His left hand is closed. The reserve pistol is found 20 feet from the rim in the brush on the near side. It left his hand at the moment the grip released before he cleared the edge. 1 shell is on the ravine floor. 1 shell is in the bloodstain at the rim. He found it from inside the grip. His back to the drop, his barrel angled upward into whatever was holding him. The 3rd round went into the bloodstain, and then the grip was gone. The camera is still running at 9:11 p.m., still tilted, still aimed at canopy and open sky. 1 hour and 38 minutes after the blood pool formed, and then something moves at the tree line. 3 forms move in from the dark gap between the pines, large, upright, bipedal, moving without sound. No calls, no vocalizations, no communication the audio can resolve. They do not pause at the edge of the trees. They do not approach the site slowly, the way an animal approaches something unfamiliar. They come directly to where Bigfoot went down, moving with the quiet, focused purpose of something that has done this before. that knows where to go, that knows what to do when it gets there. They move around the blood pool without stepping in it. They gather around Bigfoot on the ground. The camera cannot resolve their faces. What it can resolve is their scale, consistent with what the earlier footage established, consistent with the track measurements, consistent with everything the physical evidence along this trail documented from the first embedded rock to the last boot print at the rim. They are there for less than 4 minutes. When they leave, they go the way they came, back through the dark gap between the pines, back into the forest, back into the dark that hid them through all of it. The bloodstain stays. The boot is still in the mud. The broken rifle is still on the ground. Everything that was at the site before they arrived is still there after they leave. But Bigfoot is gone. They carried Bigfoot back into the forest, in the dark, without a sound, with the economy and the quiet of something that has done this before, that knows what coming for its dead looks like. I have spent a long time thinking about what it means, not just as evidence, but as a fact about what these things are. Whatever Bigfoot is, whatever all of them are, they came back through the dark to carry their dead home. That changes the shape of every question I have asked over the course of my career, not just whether Bigfoot is real, but how many of them there are, how long they have been in these forests, whether this encounter was accidental, whether Darren was followed before the first camera caught him. The cameras do not tell you what happened before they powered on. They only tell you how it ended. And it ended with 3 of them stepping out of the dark to take Bigfoot home. That is what produced the silence in me and in everyone else who looked at this record. Not any single piece of evidence. All of it together. The seismological data, the embedded rocks, the calibrated throws, the scale analysis, the track measurements, the fractured rifle, the boot in the mud, the blood, each piece confirming the others, each layer pointing at the same conclusion from a different direction until the conclusion is not a possibility anymore, but a weight the evidence simply rests on. I have dismissed footage my entire career. I am not dismissing this one. 3 of them came through those trees at 9:11 p.m., organized enough to locate what they came for in the dark and carry it out without a sound. I have walked a lot of trails alone, a lot of trails I thought I understood. So did Darren. The last clip on most people's lists would be the first one I'd show anyone who thinks this subject is a joke. A doorbell camera in suburban Ohio, a residential neighborhood, not a forest, not a trail, not somewhere remote where you'd expect something like this to turn up. A well-lit driveway on an ordinary night, a father coming home, the kind of footage that's so completely unremarkable in its setting that what happens in it takes a full second to register the first time you watch it. He pulls in, gets out of his car, and walks up to his front door with his keys in his hand. Nothing about the first few seconds feels unusual at all. Just a normal night, a normal routine. And then you notice it, standing maybe 6 feet behind him, not moving, not making a sound. Just there in the light, upright, arms at its sides, while he has no idea. He's unlocking his door, focused on getting inside, and the entire time this thing is right behind him, in a lit driveway, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, fully visible to a camera he doesn't even realize is recording. That's the moment the footage is really built around, not the arrival, not the 40 seconds after, but those specific few seconds at the door. He's stationary, focused on a small mechanical task. Keys in the lock, close enough to the frame of the door that the space behind him is open and unobstructed. And it's standing there in that open space at a distance you could cross in 2 steps. The camera holds both of them in the same frame at the same time. A man completely absorbed in something routine and something enormous completely still, just feet behind him. And the contrast between those 2 states is what makes that moment stick. Total unawareness on one side, complete stillness on the other, separated by almost no distance. I've watched this clip over and over, and every time it comes into frame, there's that same moment where it hits you. How does he not know it's there? He goes inside, the door shuts, and it just stays. Not for a second or 2, but for almost a full minute, standing there in the open like nothing about this situation is strange. Then eventually, it just turns and walks off. That's the part that doesn't sit right. It doesn't react when the door closes, doesn't move when the light inside turns on, doesn't act startled or rushed in any way. It just stands there for a while, like it's watching or thinking, and then leaves when it decides to. That doesn't feel like something that wandered into the wrong yard or got spooked out of the trees. It feels intentional, like it chose to be there and knew exactly what it was doing, while the person it was watching had no idea any of it was happening. Researchers have described something they call proximity tolerance behavior for years. The idea that these things will sometimes get close to humans, not to attack, not to make contact, but specifically to observe at close range without being detected. I'll be honest, I always treated that particular field note detail with some skepticism because it sounds like the kind of thing that's easy to claim and impossible to verify. This footage is the verification. Whatever that thing was doing in that driveway, it was doing it with full awareness that the man didn't know it was there, and it maintained that position for 40 seconds after he went inside. That's not a proximity accident. That's a choice. But here's what I think gets overlooked when people focus on the proximity alone: the location. This is Ohio. This is a suburb with neighbors within shouting distance, with porch lights and motion sensors, and the general ambient noise of a residential street at night. This isn't a rural property on the edge of a forest where you might expect the boundary between wilderness and human space to be blurry. This is deep inside human territory, in the kind of neighborhood where the nearest tree line might be a mile away. And something that size, and you can gauge the size against the car, against the doorframe, against the height of the man himself, was standing in that driveway like it had navigated there with a purpose. That implies a range of movement and a comfort with human environments that the conventional framing of this subject has never seriously accounted for. We talk about these things like they belong to the wilderness, like they're creatures of remote forests and mountain corridors. But the Ohio footage doesn't come from a remote forest. It comes from a suburb, and if it's operating that comfortably in a lit residential driveway, then the question of where exactly its territory ends and where ours begins becomes a much harder question to answer than most people are prepared for. What I keep returning to is the question of what it was actually doing there. Because the Ohio footage doesn't give you an answer. It gives you a behavior and leaves the reason for it completely open. It wasn't eating. It wasn't building anything. It wasn't responding to a stimulus that we can identify from the footage. It was watching a man come home, and then it stood in his driveway for 40 seconds after he went inside, and then it left. And if that's what it looks like when this thing is just observing, then the question that follows is an uncomfortable one. How often is this happening in places without cameras? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, and I think that's exactly the point. The second clip comes from rural West Virginia, and where the Ohio footage is unsettling because of how close it gets, this one is unsettling for a completely different reason, because of how deliberate and structured the behavior is. Home security camera, color footage, captured in the afternoon with clear lighting and a clean angle on the edge of the property. The property belongs to someone who had been doing what some researchers call habituation work, leaving objects and small amounts of food at a consistent location on the property line over a period of weeks, trying to establish a recognizable pattern of exchange. I've always been a little skeptical of that methodology, if I'm being honest. It sounds rigorous when you describe it in field notes, but in practice it can easily become someone leaving snacks in the woods and reading meaning into the fact that they disappear. Animals take food. That's not evidence of anything, but this footage isn't about food disappearing. This footage shows the response. The camera catches it walking to the edge of the property in the afternoon. It moves without any urgency, fully upright, and it goes directly to the spot where the researcher had placed a small object as part of the exchange. Not food, just an object, something deliberately chosen and positioned. The directness of that approach is worth pausing on because it doesn't match how an animal moves towards something unfamiliar. Animals hesitate, they circle, pause, check from a distance, approach and retreat before committing. None of that is present here. It walks straight to the location the way you walk to something you already know is there. There's no hesitation at the edge of the property, no pause before closing the final distance. The movement suggests prior awareness, not discovery, but execution of something already decided before it entered the frame. It stops at that spot, reaches down, and picks the object up. And then it does something I have genuinely never seen documented clearly on camera before. It examines it, not a quick grab and toss, not a sniff and drop. It holds the object, turns it, looks at it the way you'd look at something you were actually curious about, something you were trying to understand. Then it places it back down, exactly where it found it. And before it leaves, it arranges a small pile of stones in the same spot where the object had been sitting. A deliberate, arranged pile of stones, left in exchange for an object that was examined and returned. I don't know what to do with that. I've sat with this clip for a long time, and I still don't have a clean way to process it, because what it shows isn't instinct, and it isn't territorial behavior, and it isn't a stress response. What it shows is something that understood the implicit structure of what was being offered. Here is an object, here is a location, here is a repeated pattern, and responded to it within that same structure. It engaged with the exchange on its own terms. It left something behind, in the same spot, on purpose. But the detail I keep coming back to isn't the stones themselves, it's the fact that it returned the object first. It picked it up, examined it, and put it back exactly where it found it before leaving the stones. That's a sequence of decisions. It didn't take the object. It didn't discard it. It chose to return it to its original position and then add something of its own alongside it. That tells you something specific about how it understood the interaction, not as a transaction where one thing gets replaced by another, but as something more like a conversation. Here is what you left. I looked at it. Here is what I'm adding. The object stays because the object was yours. The stones are mine. That's not a territorial response. That's not instinct. That's an understanding of ownership and exchange that I find genuinely difficult to categorize using any conventional framework for animal behavior. Researchers have been documenting this exchange behavior for years across multiple regions, and it's one of those things that consistently gets dismissed because it sounds too convenient, too anthropomorphic, too much like something you'd invent to make the subject seem more compelling than it is. But watching it happen in real time, in color, in the afternoon, on a home security camera that wasn't even set up specifically to capture this, it stops being a field note detail and becomes something you have to actually reckon with. Something out there understood what was being offered and chose to respond to it. And whatever it communicated with that pile of arranged stones, it communicated it intentionally. The third clip is the one that, from a pure documentation standpoint, might be the most significant of the five. Not because of what it looks like, though the image quality is genuinely exceptional, but because of what you can hear before you ever see anything. And while putting this together, we ended up going deeper than just these clips. There are other cases, same patterns, different places, details that start to line up. We compiled everything in one place, so if you want to look into it further, the link is in the description. Dash cam footage from a forest road in northern Minnesota. Dense tree cover on both sides, maybe 20 feet of visibility before the tree line closes in completely. Daytime, clear conditions, nothing unusual about the first few seconds of the clip. The driver is moving at a normal speed and the road ahead is empty. And then the audio catches something that stops the whole clip in its tracks before the visual event even happens. Wood knocking, sharp, deliberate strikes, not a branch falling, not a random impact, not the kind of ambient forest sound that gets misidentified on recordings. 2 strikes, a pause, then 2 more. The rhythm is intentional in a way that's immediately apparent even if you've never heard a field recording of this behavior before. Researchers have been documenting wood knocking for decades and describing it as a signaling behavior used between individuals across distance, a way of communicating location or status through deliberate percussion against tree trunks. I've heard field recordings of it, but hearing it captured incidentally on dashcam audio by someone who was just driving down a road is a different experience entirely. It sounds exactly like what it's always been described as: structured, deliberate, like something is sending a message to something else. And then, 20 feet ahead of the vehicle, it steps out of the tree line. Full body, daylight, unhurried. It crosses the road at a pace that isn't rushed, not fleeing, not startled, not reacting to the vehicle the way an animal that had been surprised would react. It moves across the frame with a stride length and an arm swing that doesn't hold up to any conventional explanation, and at some point during that crossing, it turns and looks directly into the windshield. Not a glance, a sustained look. It holds that for a moment, and then it continues walking and disappears into the tree line on the other side of the road. The arm swing is one of the details analysts consistently focus on in bipedal footage because it's difficult to fake and difficult to misinterpret. Human arm motion follows a predictable pattern tied to shoulder width, stride, and balance. What shows up here doesn't match that pattern. The swing is longer, lower, and counter-rotates against the torso in a way that suggests a different structural alignment, particularly in the shoulders and upper body mass distribution. You can question lighting, distance, even scale, but sustained movement like this, in clear daylight and across multiple steps, gives you something far more stable to evaluate. The whole crossing lasts maybe 8 seconds, but there's more going on in those 8 seconds than in most footage I've seen in years. You've got the audio first, the wood knocking, clear and deliberate, happening before anything steps into view, which means whatever made that sound was already there and already signaling before it ever came out onto the road. Then you have the movement, the gait, the posture, the arm swing. None of it lines up cleanly with a human. And then there's that look. It turns toward the windshield and holds it, not like an animal reacting to a car, but like something that recognized it was being observed and chose to acknowledge it. That sequence is what makes this clip stand out. Signal, then appearance, then eye contact. That's not a random crossing. It feels structured, and the fact that the wood knocking happens just seconds before it steps out makes it much harder to write off, because it suggests the crossing wasn't accidental. Something was happening right before it appeared, and whatever that was, the timing lines up too closely to ignore. The fourth clip is the one that hits differently depending on what you already know about how these encounters tend to unfold, and it's the one I think most people underestimate when they first watch it. A hiker's phone, Appalachian Trail, Tennessee. The footage starts the way a lot of trail videos do. Someone walking, filming the path ahead, nothing remarkable about the surroundings. And then the hiker stops. He doesn't stop because he sees something. He doesn't stop because he hears something. He stops because something feels wrong, and that distinction is the most important thing about this entire clip. One of the most consistently reported elements in close proximity encounters, reported independently, across decades, across geography, by people who have never read each other's accounts, is a specific physical sensation that precedes the visual sighting. Not a sound, not a movement, not anything the witness can point to as a concrete trigger. Just a sudden, sourceless dread. An overwhelming sense that something is not right, that the environment has shifted in some way that the conscious mind can't identify, but the body is already responding to. Witnesses describe it as feeling wrong rather than seeing or hearing something wrong. And the consistency of that description across completely unrelated accounts is one of the things that makes it worth taking seriously. Researchers have connected this to infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below 20 Hz, below the threshold of human hearing that the body registers physically, rather than audibly. Large predators produce it. The documented effects on humans include unease, disorientation, nausea, and a sense of dread that feels irrational because there's no conscious auditory source to attach it to. You feel it before you understand why you feel it, and by the time you understand why, the source is already close. That's the part that unsettles me most about this particular behavior, the idea that an encounter can begin affecting you before you're even aware one is happening. Your body is already in a threat response before your brain has registered a threat. And I think about what that actually means experientially, not just clinically. You're on a trail. Nothing has changed visually. The trees look the same, the light looks the same, the path ahead is clear. And then something shifts in you that you can't name. A weight in your chest that wasn't there a second ago. A sudden, irrational certainty that you need to stop moving. Your instincts are screaming at you, and you don't know why. And the reason you don't know why is that the thing causing it is operating below the frequency your ears can process. You are being affected by something you are physically incapable of hearing. And by the time that feeling is strong enough to make you stop, it's already close enough to be doing that to you. That's not a warning system that gives you time to react. That's a warning system that tells you it's already too late to put distance between you and whatever is out there. The footage supports that in a way you can actually observe. When the hiker stops, there's no visible or audible trigger in the recording. Nothing in the frame that explains the reaction. He stops because of something the camera cannot capture. A few seconds later, when he finally locates it, the camera movement reveals something important. His head turns first, and the phone follows slightly behind. That delay means his eyes found the source before he consciously adjusted the camera. It isn't a slow scan landing on a target. It's attention being pulled to a specific point, and then the device catching up to that realization. Whatever caused the initial reaction didn't just make him stop. It aligned his attention with a location before he deliberately chose to look. That's exactly what happens in this clip. The hiker stops. You can see in the way he moves, in how he holds the phone, that he's unsettled, in a way he can't explain. He looks around. He scans the trees. And then he looks up, across a gap in the tree cover, and he sees it, standing 60 feet away, already watching him. It's not moving toward him, not reacting to being spotted, not doing anything that suggests it was surprised by the eye contact. It's just standing there, in the open, watching, the way something watches when it's been watching for a while and has no particular reason to stop. The timeline is the thing that matters here. The hiker stopped because of the feeling. The feeling came before the sighting, which means whatever produced that infrasound sensation was already close enough to affect him physically before he ever turned to look. It was already there, already operating, and he had no idea until his own body told him something was wrong. And even then, it took him another several seconds to find it visually. By the time he saw it, it had already been present long enough to affect him at a physiological level. That's a sequence, not a coincidence. And that sequence matches the field accounts with a precision that's very hard to explain away. The fifth clip is the one I want to spend the most time on, because I think it's the most misunderstood of the five and also, in some ways, the most consequential in terms of what it actually tells us. Pacific Northwest, a creek bed, trail camera footage captured in full daylight with a clear image and a good angle on the area being monitored. The camera had been positioned at a property boundary, the kind of placement researchers use when they're tracking activity in a specific corridor over time. And what it caught wasn't a sighting in the traditional sense. There's no dramatic moment of emergence, no crossing, no eye contact with the lens. What it caught was something already in the middle of doing something, and the something it was doing is the reason this clip matters as much as it does. It's building a structure. Two young saplings, flexible enough to be bent without breaking, being worked into a deliberate X formation right at the property boundary line. And the footage shows the process, not just the finished result, but the actual construction. You can watch it select the saplings, bend the first one, hold it in position, bring the second one across, and lock them together. And then it stops. There's no visible adjustment phase, no testing of the structure, no inspection the way you would expect if the result were uncertain. It straightens, takes a small step back, and orients toward the tree line. The finished structure holds its attention only briefly before it leaves the frame. That sequence suggests the outcome was already defined before the process began. The construction isn't exploratory. It follows through to a known result, and once that result is achieved, there's nothing further to evaluate. The finished structure is clean and intentional, and it's placed exactly at the line where the monitored property ends and the forest begins. Not 20 feet into the woods, not in a clearing somewhere. At the boundary, at the line. Tree structures, X formations, arches, leaners, deliberate arrangements of bent or broken saplings have been documented across North America for decades by researchers working in completely separate regions who arrived at consistent conclusions about what they represent. X formations appear at boundaries, at the edges of human-occupied land, at the margins between spaces. Arches appear at entry points and along travel corridors. The placements aren't random, and they aren't the result of wind or animal movement or coincidental growth patterns. They're placed, and they're placed in ways that suggest an understanding of spatial boundaries, of where one kind of territory ends and another begins. I've seen photographs of these structures. I've read the field documentation. But watching one being built, watching the deliberate, sequential process of selecting the material, bending it, locking it, placing it at a specific location, changes the nature of the evidence in a way that photographs of finished structures simply cannot. A photograph of a bent sapling can always be explained away. Footage of the construction process doesn't have that exit. You're watching a decision being made and executed. You're watching something choose a location, choose the material, and produce a finished structure that matches a pattern documented across thousands of miles of geography by researchers who have never been in contact with each other. What that implies about territory and spatial awareness is something I find genuinely difficult to sit with, because it means whatever built that structure understood that a boundary existed at that specific location. It understood the concept of a line between spaces, and it chose to mark that line in a way that's consistent with how these markers have been documented continent-wide for decades. That's not animal behavior in any framework I know how to apply. Animals mark territory, but they don't build structures at the edges of human property lines that mirror a documented pattern across an entire continent. That's something operating with a level of spatial and communicative awareness that doesn't fit any conventional category. And that's the point where most people would stop. You've seen enough to recognize that something is happening, and it's easy to leave it there. But the footage doesn't let you do that. Because once you've seen more than one of these, they stop feeling separate. The details carry over. The way it moves, the way it positions itself, the timing of when it acts and when it doesn't. Those patterns don't reset, they persist. And that changes what you're actually looking at. April 2026 didn't just produce clearer footage, it captured behavior that holds up no matter where you look at it from. This is the clearest Bigfoot footage ever captured in a single month, not because of how it looks, but because of what it's doing. My name is Julie, and I grew up in a logging family in the Pacific Northwest, where the forest wasn't a place we visited. It was the place we lived and understood from the inside out. And somehow, after all that time, I'm the one who ended up filming Bigfoot. And this video proves it. Bigfoot was there at the edge of the trees, far enough that my eyes were still arguing with what my body already knew. The feeling that came with it wasn't panic. It was something quieter and somehow worse than that. It reminded me of being a little girl holding a toy tree from a playset. The way those tiny painted trunks looked completely believable until you set them next to something real. That's what those trees looked like standing next to it. The distances I thought I knew felt suddenly unreliable, and the weight of its presence moving through that terrain was something I felt before I fully registered it with my eyes. It hadn't seen me yet. I was downwind, I was still, and its attention was directed somewhere else entirely. It was moving through the tree line slowly, pausing every few steps to look in one direction, then continuing, like it was checking something, completing a circuit it had completed before. Each pause had the same duration. Each check covered the same arc. This wasn't wandering. This was a pattern, something repeated enough times that the repetition had worn itself into the behavior. And watching it, I understood that whatever I had walked into had been happening long before I arrived and had absolutely nothing to do with me. The pauses were the part that stayed with me, not the movement, but the stillness between movements. The way it would stop and hold completely for 3 or 4 seconds before continuing, like it was receiving information and processing it before deciding to take the next step. That kind of patience doesn't come from instinct, it comes from somewhere else. And standing there watching it, I had this deeply uncomfortable feeling that I was a newcomer, that whatever routine this thing had in these woods, I had been walking through the middle of it my entire life without ever knowing. That's when it all started connecting. The smell that had hit me earlier, that dense, heavy, biological thing I had never encountered in all my years out there, that was it. The silence that had dropped all at once. No birds, no insects, nothing. The kind of silence I had never once heard in those woods in any season. That was it too. My body had known before my eyes did, had slowed my pace and quieted my steps and tightened my grip on my phone without a single conscious instruction from me. And standing there, watching it move through the trees, I understood that I hadn't stumbled onto something. I had walked directly into the middle of something that was already happening, and the only reason I was still undetected was luck. And then, without any warning and without any apparent reason, it stopped completely in the middle of a stride and stood absolutely still at the edge of the trees. And then I watched it raise its head slowly, and I knew immediately what it was doing. It was reading the air, standing there processing whatever the wind was carrying with a patience and a methodical calm that had no urgency in it at all. And what unsettled me most wasn't the size of it, or even the fact of it. It was the intelligence behind that stillness, the deliberateness of it. This wasn't an animal catching a scent and reacting. This was something that knew how to gather information before it decided what to do with it. And I wonder sometimes whether what it found in that wind was enough to tell it exactly where I was standing before it even turned its head. It turned and looked directly at me, and then it started moving, and the way it came toward me was so much more frightening than any aggression would have been, because aggression has a shape and a duration and an endpoint, and this had absolutely none of those things, just one steady, deliberate step after another, closing the distance between us in a way that felt less like an animal approaching, and more like weather rolling in. Inevitable? Indifferent, already in motion long before I became aware of it. I was backing up with the camera still raised, and I remember trying to keep the frame steady while also tracking where my feet were going, because the terrain behind me had roots and uneven ground, and anything that made me stumble was going to cost me distance I couldn't afford to lose. Every step it took was clean and certain. Every step I took backward was a negotiation. The camera catches this stretch in a way that I think is one of the most important parts of the footage. Not because of what it shows about the size of it, though that registers clearly, but because of what it shows about the difference between how it moves and how I move. You can see the ground between us. You can see what that ground does to my pace and what it doesn't do to its. There are rocks, there are roots, there is a shallow drainage cut that runs diagonal across the space between us, the kind of thing that would make any person adjust their stride without thinking, and it doesn't adjust. It doesn't register any of it. The ground between us was something I had to solve one step at a time, and for whatever was coming toward me, it simply didn't exist as a problem. That gap, not the physical distance, but the functional one, the difference between terrain that slows you down and terrain that means nothing. That's what the footage captures, and that's what kept replacing every calculation I was trying to make with something I liked a lot less. What I noticed as it got closer was the way it moved through the undergrowth. No negotiation with the terrain, no adjustment for the branches or the uneven ground. Just this clean, continuous forward movement that showed absolutely no awareness of the physical environment between us as an obstacle. And I remember thinking that if I turned and ran, the only thing that mattered was how much of a head start I could get. And that number was shrinking with every second I stood there. I also noticed the way its arms moved, and this is the part I've never quite been able to find the right words for. Not swinging the way a person's arms swing, not hanging the way an animal's limbs hang. Something that sat between those two things, and also belonged to neither of them. A movement pattern my brain kept reaching for a category for, and kept coming back empty, like trying to remember a word that exists in a language you don't speak. And then it made a sound that I still hear sometimes in the space between being asleep and being awake. It wasn't a roar, wasn't a scream, wasn't any of the vocalizations I might have had some prior reference point for. It was lower than all of that, and deeper than all of that, something that seemed to originate in its chest and travel through the ground before it reached me, and I felt it vibrating in my sternum a full half-second before my ears registered it as sound. I've heard thunder roll through those mountains and felt it in my chest the same way, except thunder doesn't have a source standing 12 feet away from you that is looking directly at you when it happens. The camera picks it up. When you reach that moment in the footage, you will hear it, and I need you to understand that what comes through a screen is a fraction of what it felt like standing there receiving it with nothing between me and the source of it. And that sound is the moment everything I had been holding together stopped holding. The shift happened without any kind of build-up. 1 second it was moving the way it had been, steady and controlled, and the next it stopped and drove its arm into a tree hard enough that the entire trunk snapped sideways in frame. The impact wasn't a crack or a break. It was a deep, heavy sound that carried through the ground first. I felt it in my chest before I understood what I was hearing. and the camera caught the leaves shaking loose all at once, the trunk still moving after the point of contact, like something had hit it with more force than the wood knew how to absorb. My hand dropped for half a second and came right back up, not because I was thinking about it, but because some part of me understood that lowering the camera meant losing whatever this was, and I wasn't going to get another chance at it. It didn't follow that with anything. No charge, no sudden movement toward me. It just stood there, and the footage holds on it through that. Stillness in a way that I think matters as much as the strike itself. You can see the trunk still moving in the background, still working through the energy of the impact, and in the foreground it's completely still. Not the stillness of something that spent itself on the strike, but the stillness of something that had more, and chose not to use it. It was looking at me the way you look at something when you've just made a point, and you're waiting to see if the point landed. And the distance between us in that frame, close enough that the camera catches detail it hadn't been catching before, close enough that there's no question about what you're looking at, was exactly the distance it had chosen, not the distance I had managed to create. That distinction mattered. That was the moment the distance between us stopped feeling like protection, because whatever it had just done, it hadn't been about the tree. It had been about showing me exactly how much space it didn't need. There were moments where it looked clear enough, where the frame held and the distance felt close, but every time it got to that point, something broke it. It would step just enough to distort the outline or pass through a shadow that flattened the shape, or I'd lose it for half a second trying to keep up. The footage shows it, the moments where it almost locks in and then slips just out of it. You can see size, movement, detail, but not enough to remove every other explanation. Standing there, I understood something that didn't help me at all. Being close wasn't the same as having it clearly. It moved before I understood that it had decided to. There was no build-up this time, just one step that turned into several all at once, fast enough that the frame couldn't hold it cleanly. I tried to follow it with the camera and realized almost immediately that I was already behind it, that whatever sense I had of how quickly it could cross that ground had been wrong in a way that mattered. The footage still catches enough of it. You can see how much distance disappears in the space it takes me to react, how easily it moves through ground that should have slowed it down. I felt my footing shift as I stepped back, not even a full step, just enough to keep that space from collapsing completely. And even that felt late. If it decided to close that distance, what would I even do? And then it stopped again, not where it had been, and not where I expected it to be, but closer, like it had chosen that position instead of arriving at it. Standing there with the camera still up, trying to steady it without losing sight of it, I understood that whatever distance existed between us wasn't something I could manage anymore. It was something it was controlling. It didn't come straight at me again. It angled off just enough to put a stretch of thicker growth between us, tight brush, young trees close together, the kind of ground that forces you to slow down. It didn't slow down at all. The camera holds on it as it moves straight into that stretch, and the difference is immediate. Branches snap instead of bending. Thin trunks jerk sideways as it passes, some of them not springing back right away. There's no hesitation in its movement, no change in pace, just a clean, continuous push forward like nothing in front of it is meant to stop it. You can actually see the path it's making as it goes, not around anything, but through it. I remember watching that and running the same calculation I had been running since this started. What would it look like if I went through that same stretch at a full run? How much distance would I lose just fighting through what it was walking through without breaking stride? And the answer was enough that I stopped finishing the calculation because finishing it wasn't useful. I took a step back without meaning to and felt my footing catch almost immediately, just enough to remind me how that ground actually works. It slows you down. It forces you to choose every step. And then it came through the other side still moving, still steady, like none of it had cost it anything at all. There wasn't anything out there I could put between us that would matter. The moment it cleared that stretch, something else moved. Working through this footage led me into other cases that share the same kinds of patterns, and the more I looked into them, the more consistent those patterns became across completely different places. I gathered everything in one place, so if you want to take a closer look at it, the link is in the description. It wasn't in the same place. It came from deeper in the trees, off to the side of where I had been focused, and the camera doesn't catch it cleanly because I didn't move fast enough to follow it. Just a shift, a disturbance that didn't match anything I had seen the wind do, or anything small enough to ignore. It was heavier than that, deliberate in a way I couldn't place, but couldn't dismiss either. How long it had been there before it moved, I had no way of knowing, and that question arrived with a weight that the presence itself hadn't fully produced yet. I kept the frame on the one in front of me because I didn't know what would happen if I lost it. The footage picks up the audio, a low shift, something pressing through brush in a way that felt too measured to be random, moving at a pace that didn't match anything startled or reactive. It was lateral movement. It wasn't coming toward me. It was going somewhere specific, parallel to where I was standing, and the specific quality of that, the fact that it had a destination that wasn't me, was somehow more unsettling than if it had been approaching, because it meant there was a geometry to this that I wasn't seeing yet. Whatever was moving through those trees wasn't reacting to me. It was moving into position regardless of me, on a line that had been decided before I was aware any of this was happening. The timing started lining up. The one in front of me didn't move, but it didn't need to. It was already where it needed to be. The one in the trees wasn't wandering. It was moving on a line, steady, covering ground without hesitation. I tried to track it by sound, where it started, how far it had moved, and the distance it covered without me fully registering it didn't make sense unless it had been doing that the entire time. The one in front shifted slightly, and this time it didn't feel like a reaction. It matched. That was when it stopped feeling like two separate things and started feeling like I had stepped into something already in motion. I wasn't being approached. I was being placed. The sound continued, steady, unhurried, covering ground. And I remembered trying to estimate from the audio alone how large it was and how far it had already traveled from wherever it started. And both of those estimates kept coming out larger than I wanted them to. The one in front of me hadn't moved. It was still holding its position, still oriented toward me, but something in the quality of its attention had shifted in a way the camera picks up if you're watching for it. A slight reorientation, not toward the sound, but as if in response to it, like the sound wasn't information it needed to locate, but confirmation of something it already knew. That distinction between locating a sound and confirming it was the thing that started changing what I understood about what was happening around me. The one in front of me noticed it the way you notice something you've been expecting. It didn't react the way something reacts to an unexpected sound. It shifted in a way that looked more like acknowledgement, the way you turn towards something you already knew was coming. A slight repositioning, weight transferring, its attention moving just a few degrees before settling back. And then it adjusted its position in relation to me, not by coming straight forward, but by angling just enough that I was no longer directly in front of it, the way I had been. The movement wasn't big and it wasn't fast, but it was exact, like it was placing itself somewhere specific, like there was a plan, and it was executing its part of it. Then the sound from the trees shifted again, further along now, further around, and I realized it had covered more ground than I had been tracking. I had been monitoring it as a fixed point, and it had been moving the whole time, and the distance it had traveled, while I wasn't fully attending to it, landed in a way that made me reassess everything I thought I knew about where I was standing relative to what was out there. The one in front of me had my attention. That had been true since the beginning, and something had been using that. I started backing toward the house without deciding to. Not running, moving the way you move when something in you has already done the calculation and doesn't want to alarm whatever is watching by making it obvious. The one in front of me didn't follow. It held its position and watched me go, and that stillness felt worse than the approach had, because an animal that wants to close distance closes it. This didn't. It just watched me leave, with the particular patience of something that knows exactly where I'm going. I reached the house. I got inside. I pulled the door shut, and then both sides of the house started making noise at the same time. The sounds weren't the same. The one on the left was heavier, slower, each step carrying through the wall like weight being set down. The one on the right moved faster, covering more ground, lighter but more precise. Their movement started out uneven, but quickly aligned into something deliberate. The one on the right slowed just enough. The one on the left adjusted. And suddenly, they were moving in a way that felt controlled, like the difference between them wasn't a limitation. It was something they could correct. I turned between the two sides, trying to follow both, and realized I couldn't, not because they were fast, but because they didn't need to be. They already knew where I was. Not one presence moving around the structure. Two, I could hear them separately. One along the left wall, one along the right, moving in a way that had no overlap, no confusion, no doubling back, distinct, coordinated. The camera catches it if you listen carefully, the sound shifting on both channels almost simultaneously. One of them was moving faster than the other, covering more of the perimeter, and I remember turning between the two walls trying to track both at once and understanding that the only thing that exercise was telling me was how many directions I couldn't watch at the same time. The left wall went quiet first. Then the right continued for another few seconds, something large pressing along the exterior in a way that carried through the boards. And then that stopped too. A full stop, not a fade, like both of them had reached wherever they were going at the same time and simply arrived. The silence after that was different from the silence before. It had a shape to it. It felt less like absence and more like held breath, like whatever was outside those walls had stopped moving, not because it had left, but because it had finished. I opened the door before I had a reason to, not because it felt safe, because the walls had stopped feeling like a boundary and started feeling like a box, and whatever was outside those walls already knew exactly which box I was in. I stepped out and the clearing was empty, completely still. No movement at the tree line, no sound from either side of the house, nothing in the air that I could point to. I scanned left first, along the wall where one of them had been moving. The ground there was undisturbed in the way ground looks when nothing has crossed it recently, and I held the camera on it long enough to confirm that before moving on. I scanned right. The same. Whatever had been pressing along those walls had not left tracks I could see from where I was standing, had not broken anything, had not left any physical evidence of the path it took, and the absence of that evidence was its own kind of information. I held the camera on the tree line directly ahead for a long moment, watching for any shift in the shadows between the trunks, any weight moving through the undergrowth, any branch that was still returning to position from something that had passed through it. The trees stood the way they always stand. The light between them was unchanged, and the longer I stood there finding nothing, the more wrong the nothing felt. I had heard two separate presences moving around the outside of that structure, and they had not walked away. I had not heard them walk away. They had simply stopped, and stopped things don't disappear. They're somewhere, holding still, and the only question is where. I kept the camera on the tree line longer than I should have. Nothing moved, nothing broke, but parts of it didn't sit right. There were gaps between the trees that felt too solid, patches of shadow that didn't shift the way they should when you look at them from different angles. Every time I tried to focus on one, it looked normal again, but not completely. The longer I stood there, the harder it was to believe there was nothing there, because nothing stays that still. I took 4, maybe 5 steps further into the open, enough to clear the doorway completely, enough to see the full arc of the tree line from one end to the other. And that's when I understood that the stillness wasn't absence. It was arrangement. They were already there. Not at the tree line. Closer than that. I had walked back out directly into the middle of the space they had positioned themselves around, and not one of them had needed to move to make that happen. I had done it myself. The first one I saw was to my left, not the one I had been watching this entire time. A different one, positioned further back, but not far enough back, close enough that the camera catches it without any ambiguity at all. I swung toward it without thinking and held it in frame for long enough to confirm what I was seeing. The shape of it, the stillness of it, the fact that it was facing me and had been facing me before I turned. And in that moment, while I was focused left, the one I had been tracking the entire time stepped back into view directly ahead of me. The camera lurches as I try to hold both at once, and that's when I see where the one in front is looking, not at me, past me. To the right. I turned, and there was the third. closer than either of the others, positioned at the edge of the clearing in a way that put it almost behind me. And the camera catches it fully. Size, shape, stillness, all of it. In the clearest frame this footage produces. Clearer than anything before it, clearer than anything I had been able to confirm up to that point, because this one wasn't obscured by distance or tree cover or the limits of what I could hold in frame while I was moving. It was right there, in open ground, in full view, making no effort to be anything other than completely visible. All three of them were looking at me. Not at each other, not at the tree line, not at anything else. The one ahead, the one to the left, the one behind me, and to the right. All of them still, all of them present, all of them arranged in an arc that I was standing at the center of. And then the one in front took one step forward into the best light and stopped. The step brought it fully into the open, into a position where nothing was between it and me. No branches in the way, no shadow cutting through it, no movement to blur the shape. Just open ground and full light, and the camera holding it long enough that nothing breaks the image. This time the frame doesn't chase it. It locks into place and holds steady. You can see everything, the height against the trees behind it, the way its arms hang, the way its shoulders sit, the way it stands without shifting or adjusting. There's no distortion, no obstruction, no moment where it slips out of view. It holds there in frame, uninterrupted, long enough that nothing about what you're seeing breaks or changes. Long enough that you don't have to pause it, don't have to question it, don't have to fill in anything your eyes didn't catch. And that was the first moment where nothing about it could be mistaken for anything else. The timestamp blinks 2:14 a.m. in the lower corner of camera 3's frame, and for the first 4 seconds of the clip, there is nothing. Just ponderosa pines at the edge of the motion zone, wet bark catching the infrared, a thin ground fog sitting low across the basin floor. Then the left edge of the frame shifts. Something moves into it from the tree line, and the word that hits me before any conscious thought is enormous. Not bear enormous, not elk enormous, something else entirely. Something that walks upright with the casual authority of a thing that has never once been afraid of what lives in the dark with it. Bigfoot moves through camera 3's field of view like the woods belong to it personally, and the mule deer carcass hanging from its right hand swings like a suitcase, not draped across its shoulders, not cradled, gripped by one rear leg, dangling, the animal's dead weight pulling toward the earth while Bigfoot barely registers the resistance. The deer is big. Later, I estimate a mature doe, probably 140 to 160 pounds field-dressed, and it bounces against the mud with every stride, leaving a trench in the soft ground nearly 8 inches deep that I can make out clearly once daylight hits the same corridor 12 hours later. The shoulder width is extraordinary, at least 36 inches, maybe closer to 40, far broader than any recorded great ape or human athlete. The arms hang unnaturally long, one carrying the deer, the other swinging with slow, deliberate confidence. The fur is dark, almost black in infrared, wet-looking and matted like it has been forcing through heavy brush. At the 47-yard mark, Bigfoot pauses for 2 seconds, and I can see white breath rising in steady plumes in the cold pre-dawn air. A warm-blooded animal, a very large one, breathing easily under a load that would destroy a person's shoulder. What Bigfoot does not do is stop to eat. The deer is already partially consumed, the ribcage opened somewhere else, but Bigfoot keeps moving. A scavenger would feed there. There is no reason to carry it unless the destination matters more than the meal. The ravine sits 340 yards southwest of camera 3, and that is exactly where Bigfoot goes, without hesitation, without checking, without a single wasted step. There is no wandering in that walk, no exploration. Bigfoot knows where it is going the way I know the path from my truck to my gear locker. By rote, by repetition, by use. Predators kill where it's convenient. What I'm watching here looked like delivery. What happens over the next 10 days will make the first sighting look like a warm-up, because Bigfoot doesn't just come back. Bigfoot comes back every single night, and what it's bringing with it will shatter everything you think you know about apex predator behavior. 3 cameras catch the second visit 48 hours later. The triangulation of all 3 angles gives me something I didn't have before. A complete route. Bigfoot enters from the same tree line corridor every single time, moves along the same bearing, crosses the same low point in the creek, and disappears into the ravine at the same gap between two deadfall cedars. The consistency is not the behavior of an animal wandering through its range. It is the behavior of an animal running an established line, the same way a person drives the same road to work every morning without consciously deciding to. The second carcass is a wild hog, a big boar by the look of the tusks, somewhere in the 250-pound range. Bigfoot carries it the same way. One hand, one leg, the body dragging and bouncing, and moves at the same unhurried pace that somehow covers ground faster than it looks like it should. 3 nights after that, a black-tailed deer. Then an elk calf, half-grown, maybe 5 months old, its spotted summer coat still faintly visible in the infrared. 4 separate animals in 10 days, all transported to the same location, none of them consumed on camera, none of them dropped or abandoned partway through. Always at night, always alone, and always toward the ravine. On the 4th recorded visit, the one with the elk calf, Bigfoot does something that stops me cold when I review the footage. At the 60-yard mark from the camera, Bigfoot simply stops, sets the calf down on the ground with a deliberateness that looks almost careful, then turns and walks back 20 yards toward the tree line, stands completely still, and scans the woods in a slow arc that takes nearly 6 full minutes to complete. Not moving, not feeding, just watching. The infrared catches the steam of its breath in slow, regular pulses, and the patience of it is the most unsettling thing I have seen on any of my cameras in 11 years of fieldwork. That 6-minute pause, that's not an animal being cautious. That's an animal running a security check. When Bigfoot is finally satisfied, it returns to the elk calf, picks it back up by the same leg, and continues toward the ravine without hurrying. The whole sequence feels less like wildlife behavior and more like a protocol. That tells me something about the level of intelligence I am dealing with, and it terrifies me accordingly. The rain comes in hard on day 11, a Pacific front that dumps nearly 3 inches across the ridge in under 6 hours and turns every game trail in the basin into a running creek. I almost pull camera 6 that morning because the housing seal has been questionable since September, and I cannot afford to lose another unit to water damage. I decide to leave it. That decision changes everything, because when the front passes and the light comes back in the early afternoon, camera 6 captures the first daylight footage of the ravine floor in the entire 11 weeks the array has been running. And what I see when I pull that card makes me sit down on the tailgate of my truck and stay there for a long time without moving. Bigfoot enters the ravine basin at 2:47 p.m., carrying bones, not a carcass, not a fresh kill. Bones already cleaned to white, long bones from multiple different animals bundled loosely against its chest with one arm, the way a person might carry a load of firewood. The daylight is flat and gray after the rain. Excellent visibility, no infrared grain, no compression artifacts. And for the first time, I can see the ravine itself clearly in the background as Bigfoot moves through the frame. The basin floor is covered in skeletal remains. I pause the footage and lean close to my laptop screen and spend a long time making sure I am seeing what I think I am seeing. I am. Arranged remains, not scattered, not piled randomly the way bones accumulate at a natural kill site where coyotes and ravens and time do the organizing. Arranged, intentionally, unmistakably, with a logic I can see, even if I cannot immediately decode it. Antlers have been stacked together along the north-facing bank, tines interlocked, the largest on the bottom, smaller ones layered ascending. Rib cages, at least 4 of them, from animals of different sizes, have been stood upright against the trunk of a fallen cedar and positioned side by side like books on a shelf. Long bones, femurs, and tibias, and cannon bones from deer and elk have been laid out in parallel rows on a flat section of gravel near the creek, longest to shortest, left to right, and near the water's edge, clustered together with a density that makes the back of my neck tighten, a pile of skulls. Deer skulls, hog skulls, what looks like a bear cub, the elk calf from 3 nights ago, its head already separated and placed with the others. The most frightening monsters are the ones with rituals. Bigfoot kneels at the skull pile and begins working. moving individual skulls with both hands, repositioning them, tilting them, adjusting their orientation with the focused attention of someone rearranging something that has specific rules I am not privy to. Then Bigfoot lifts one elk skull and places it directly on top of a second, larger elk skull and steps back. Stands there, looks at the result for nearly 30 seconds without moving, the steam of its breath rising steady in the cold, wet air. Then Bigfoot adjusts the top skull 2 inches to the left, steps back again, and appears satisfied. I watch that sequence 17 times. I count, because what it means is the thing I cannot stop turning over, the thing that sits under every other thought I have had since that afternoon on the tailgate. This is not a feeding site. This is not territory marking in any framework I was trained to recognize. This is maintenance. This is curation. Something is being built here, and Bigfoot is tending it. You think the bone field is just an animal's feeding site? You are completely, devastatingly wrong. And what Camera 6 captures in the daylight after the rains will be the single most disturbing thing ever recorded by a trail camera in North American wilderness history. Camera 2 sits lower than the others, mounted on a basalt outcrop about 14 feet off the ravine floor, angled down into the basin at roughly 35 degrees. I positioned it there in September to capture ground-level movement along the creek corridor, and for 11 weeks it has given me nothing but deer and one bobcat. At 5:51 a.m. on day 13, 17 minutes before official sunrise, Camera 2 earns every hour I spent hiking it into position. The mountain lion enters the frame from the eastern drainage, moving low and deliberate along the creek bank with its belly close to the wet gravel. It is a large tom, easily 180 pounds, with the thick neck and heavy paws of a dominant male in his prime. His movement is confident in the specific way of an animal that has been using this ridgeline long enough to consider it his. He scent marks the cedar stump at the basin entrance without hesitating, then lifts his head and reads the air, nostrils working, ears rotating forward. The smell of blood and old bone is everywhere down here. To a mountain lion, this ravine must smell like the center of the world. Bigfoot comes out of the tree line 40 seconds later, carrying a bundle of long bones against its chest, and stops the instant it clears the cedars. The two animals see each other at the same moment across roughly 30 feet of open gravel. Neither moves. The mountain lion drops into a crouch so fast it looks like a controlled fall, tail rigid, ears flat, every muscle in its hindquarters loading like a spring. Bigfoot stands fully upright, bones still held against its chest, and watches. For 8 seconds, nothing happens. The creek runs. Steam rises from both animals in the cold morning air. The mountain lion growls first, a low, resonant warning that Camera 2's audio picks up clearly, and begins a slow lateral circle, refusing to concede the carcass pile behind it. It is the dominant male's calculation, too much territory at stake to retreat from something it has not yet confirmed it cannot handle. Bigfoot takes one step forward. The mountain lion launches. The cat covers 30 feet in less than a second and hits Bigfoot in the upper chest and shoulder with both front paws extended, claws fully deployed, the impact violent enough to drive both of them backward into the brush at the ravine's edge. Camera 2 shakes on its mount from the concussive force transmitted through the ground. Branches explode. Dirt and wet leaves spray across the lower frame. The mountain lion gets purchase on Bigfoot's shoulder and neck, rear legs raking in the fast churning motion cats use to open abdominal cavities on deer. Bigfoot roars, and the sound is unlike anything in Camera 2's audio record, a deep percussive blast that sends the creek birds out of the willows 200 yards downstream. Bigfoot gets both hands on the lion's torso, pulls it partially free, and drives it sideways into the cedar trunk with enough force to split the bark in a vertical crack I photograph later at nearly 4 feet long. The mountain lion drops, springs again, goes for the face. Bigfoot catches it midair by the throat and foreleg, twists. The front leg snaps with a sound the microphone captures cleanly, a single dense crack like a green branch under a boot. That clip ended all debate for me. This was not a relic hiding from humans. This was an apex predator. Bigfoot drives the lion into the gravel and does not stop until nothing moves, then places the body carefully beside the skull pile. Like everything else that enters this ravine belongs to it now. And now that Bigfoot knows something has been challenging its territory, the patrols begin, the warnings escalate, and what gets left on the trails will make you sick to your stomach. The morning after the mountain lion fight, Camera 1 picks up Bigfoot moving the perimeter at 4:18 a.m., not carrying anything, not transporting a carcass toward the ravine, just walking the boundary line of the basin with a slow, deliberate circuit. By day 15, the patrols are happening twice nightly. By day 17, Camera 4 captures one in full afternoon daylight, 3:22 p.m., the kind of hour when Bigfoot has never once appeared on any of my units across the entire array. The mountain lion fight has changed something in the behavioral calculus, tightened it, charged it. Whatever tolerance Bigfoot previously extended to the surrounding wildlife has been revoked, and the woods around the ravine begin reflecting that revocation in ways I can document and photograph and still barely believe. The tree damage appears first on the northern approach, the same corridor the mountain lion used. 7 ponderosa pines in a 40-yard stretch show fresh damage at heights between 6 and 8 feet off the ground. Not claw marks, which leave parallel grooves with tapered ends, but something broader, more forceful, the bark driven inward in splintered concave impacts that I initially mistake for bear sign until I put a tape measure against the width and realize no bear's forepaw spans 11 inches across. These are strikes. Open-handed, full-force strikes against tree trunks, and the wood underneath the bark is cracked in several of them, not just bruised. What I was looking at on those trees wasn't territorial marking. It was a warning written in a language that anything with a survival instinct could read. The dead coyotes begin appearing on day 18, 3 of them over 4 days, placed at intervals along the 2 main access trails that lead toward the ravine from the southeast. Each one has a broken back, cleanly broken, mid-spine, with no signs of feeding, no tracks from a second predator. No evidence of a chase or a struggle in the surrounding ground. They are simply there, positioned across the trail like barriers, like punctuation. I photograph each one and send the images to a wildlife pathologist contact in Oregon who tells me the spinal trauma is consistent with something applying sudden, massive compressive force directly downward across the animal's back. He asks me what I think did it. I tell him I'm still working on that. The black bear appears on day 20, a sow with 2 cubs moving down the eastern drainage toward the basin in the early morning. Camera 8 captures her approach, her paws at the tree line 80 yards out, and then the sudden full reversal, cubs scrambling to follow before she has cleared the cedars or come within any angle that should have given her a visual or scent read on the ravine. She does not look back. She moves her cubs out of the drainage at a pace just below a run and does not reappear on any camera for the remaining duration of the study. Bigfoot chases her out of frame 11 seconds after she turns, not pursuing to close distance, ensuring departure. This ravine now has one rule: only one animal decides who enters. You think you've seen the worst of what this footage contains? You haven't even come close. Because something far more fragile than a mountain lion or a black bear is about to walk into that ravine, and Bigfoot has already been watching him for a very, very long time. Camera 9 is the one I almost never check first. When I pull the card on day 23 and load it into the laptop, I am expecting more of the same. Instead, I get a flashlight beam cutting through the dark at 6:47 p.m., and behind it, a man. He enters the drainage from the south, moving fast and careless, boots hitting the wet ground with the flat-footed confidence of someone who has been in these hills before and does not think they hold anything he needs to be afraid of. He is carrying a rifle slung across his back and a heavy pack that tells me he is planning to be out here for a while. In his left hand, the flashlight sweeps in short arcs, and I can see from the way the beam keeps dropping toward the ground that he is following a blood trail. The mountain lion's blood trail, I realize, tracing backward from the ravine floor along the same corridor the cat used to enter. Someone has been on the ridge line, someone found blood sign and followed it inward. The way poachers follow wounded animals they have no legal right to be pursuing on this land, into a basin they have no permit to enter. I watch him cross Camera 9's field of view and feel the first cold certainty settle into my stomach. He does not know what left that blood. He does not know that the trail lead to Bigfoot, and he does not know that somewhere beyond the tree line at the ravine's edge, something is already aware that he is here. Camera 6 picks him up 14 minutes later at the basin entrance, flashlight sweeping across the bone field for the first time. He stops. The beam moves slowly left to right across the arranged remains, the stacked antlers, the upright rib cages, the long bones laid out in their parallel rows, and even from the camera angle, I can see the change in his posture, the way his shoulders come up, the way his feet stop moving and stay stopped. He stands at the edge of the bone field for 2 full minutes without advancing, the flashlight working back and forth across the skulls near the creek bank. Then he does the thing that makes my chest tighten when I watch it. He walks in. He kicks apart the nearest skull arrangement first, the one closest to the cedar line, his boot scattering 3 deer skulls across the gravel with a casual violence that reads as either bravado or profound ignorance of where he is and what this place means to whatever built it. He crouches and picks up a smaller skull, turns it over in the flashlight beam, and slides it into his pack. Then a second one. He is collecting, treating the bone field like a curiosity, like something he stumbled onto that belongs to no one and therefore belongs to him. Camera 6's audio is not strong enough to capture footsteps at distance, but at the 23-minute mark of the man's time in the basin, something moves at the upper edge of the frame. A darkness that is slightly denser than the surrounding dark, shifting position at the tree line without sound, without the branch snap or leaf crush that any animal of that mass should be producing on wet ground. Bigfoot is at the perimeter. Has been there, I realize when I scrub backward through the footage, since approximately 3 minutes after the man entered the bone field. Bigfoot has been watching him dismantle the shrine for 20 minutes without making a sound, and the patience of that, the absolute stillness of it, is the most frightening thing Camera 6 has ever recorded. When I understood what I was watching, I stopped the footage and sat in the dark for a long time before I could make myself press play again. The man spends another 40 minutes in the basin. He handles bones, repositions himself, photographs things with his phone, moves around the perimeter of the arranged remains with the casual tourism of someone who has no idea he is being observed from a distance of less than 60 feet by something that has already decided what he is. Bigfoot circles the entire time, staying just outside the flashlight's reach, moving only when the beam moves away, patient and systematic and absolutely silent. The circle tightens incrementally over the 40 minutes in a way I can track by watching the density of shadow at the tree line shift position on the camera. By the time the man decides to leave, Bigfoot is no longer at the perimeter. Bigfoot is between him and the drainage exit. The man's flashlight finds the gap in the cedars and he moves toward it, pack heavy with stolen skulls, rifle still slung and useless on his back, and at the moment he reaches the gap, Bigfoot steps out of the dark and fills it completely. The footage captures the man's flashlight beam hitting Bigfoot center mass and then dropping as the man drops, stumbling backward onto the gravel, and the sound that comes out of him, picked up clearly on Camera 6's audio at that proximity, is not a word. It is not a shout. It is the sound a person makes when every survival instinct fires at once, and the body cannot decide what to do with all of it simultaneously. Bigfoot does not close the distance. Not yet. Bigfoot stands in the gap and watches the man scramble backward into the center of the bone field, and the deliberateness of that, allowing the retreat only in one direction, only deeper in, is when I understood that what I was watching was not an animal reacting. It was an animal that had already decided how this would end and was simply executing the steps in order. The man realizes where he has been herded when his back foot hits the skull pile. He stops, looks behind him, looks back at Bigfoot standing motionless at the only exit. His flashlight hand is shaking badly enough that the beam bounces across the arranged bones in a way that would almost look like a light show if the context were anything other than what it is. He starts talking. I cannot make out words at this audio quality, but the cadence is unmistakable, fast, high, the rhythm of a person bargaining with something that does not recognize the transaction. Bigfoot walks toward him slowly, reaches down near the cedar line without breaking stride, and picks up the broken elk antler that has been lying at the bone field's edge since the mountain lion fight, carries it loose in one hand, continues forward until the man has nowhere left to go and the skull pile is directly at his back. And then Bigfoot simply stops and looks at him for a long moment in the thin beam of the flashlight. What follows next is recorded in full by Camera 6, and I will tell you plainly that I have not watched it more than once. I have not been able to. Bigfoot skins the man alive as he screams in agony. It was slow and methodical and carried out with the same focused deliberateness I watched Bigfoot apply to repositioning skulls and walking perimeter lines and stacking antlers in order of size. The Bonefields Creek keeps running through all of it. The audio does not spare anything. When it is finished, Bigfoot places what remains at the center of the shrine, beside the elk skull pile, arranged with the same care applied to everything else in this ravine. Then Bigfoot walks to the drainage exit, pauses at the gap in the cedars, and looks back at the camera for 11 seconds. The same duration as the Camera 5 look, the same stillness, the same full and complete attention directed straight down the lens. Then Bigfoot walks out of frame, and Camera 6 records nothing but the creek and the bone field and the dark for the remaining 4 hours until dawn. I have filed the footage with the appropriate authorities. I have answered their questions. I have not returned to the basin. I do not intend to. What I know now, after 23 days of footage across 9 cameras and more hours of review than I can accurately count, is this. Bigfoot was not hiding in those woods. Bigfoot was not a shy, elusive primate avoiding human contact out of fear. Bigfoot was managing a territory with rules I did not understand until it was too late for someone else. The frame is already shaking when the footage begins. I don't remember pressing record. I don't remember pulling my phone out. The camera is up and running before my brain catches up, and in those first lurching seconds, the image swings wide, catches bark, catches sky, catches nothing, and then it finds them. Bigfoot is standing at the far edge of the clearing, maybe 40 feet out, and Bigfoot is 8, maybe 9 feet tall, shoulders like the hood of a truck, fur matted and dark and moving in the way that wet animal fur moves. Bigfoot has one hand wrapped around the throat of a naked man. The man's feet are 6 inches off the ground, maybe 8. How long can I stand here filming before that thing notices me too? The clouds break in that exact moment. I swear they do. I've watched this footage 100 times, and they break right there. And full moonlight comes down like a stage light into the clearing, and everything sharpens, gets hard-edged and silver-washed and brutally clear. The naked man starts to convulse. Not a tremor, not a flinch. It was a full-body seizure, spine arching backward at an angle I've never seen a human spine make. And I work in timber. I've seen what a falling tree does to a man's back, and this was worse. I remember thinking, he's having a medical episode. He needs help. I need to call someone. I remember thinking that for about 4 seconds, until the man's fingers started to change. The fingers were the first thing. They elongated, joints cracking one after another in a sound that the microphone picked up even at 40 feet. A rapid sequence of pops like a knuckle-cracking compulsion taken to a horrible extreme. Then the jaw. The jaw unhinged downward and forward, not dislocating in the way a jaw can dislocate, but growing, the bone stretching the skin ahead of it. I've logged in the backcountry for 11 years. I've seen bears up close. I've seen what a cougar does to a deer carcass. Nothing I have ever seen prepared me for watching a human being's proportions rearrange themselves in real time. Bigfoot tightened its grip in response. Not out of fear, I don't think, but out of instinct. The way you hold tighter when something you're gripping starts to fight back. The neck under Bigfoot's palm was thickening. The whole body was thickening, mass appearing from somewhere that biology has no framework for, maybe 30 pounds of it, maybe 40, accumulating in the torso and shoulders in the span of seconds. That's when I realized that he was transforming into a werewolf. If this is real, what does that make the thing holding? Him. And what chance do I have against either of them? Bigfoot released slightly. I caught that, you can see it in the footage, this fractional loosening. And I think Bigfoot was recalibrating, adjusting the grip for new geometry. But the geometry wasn't done changing. The skin across the back split in a line along the spine, and hair erupted through the gap in dense, dark patches, spreading outward like time-lapse mold, covering the shoulders, the arms, the thighs. The legs bent backward at the knee in a way no human knee bends. The digitigrade curve of an animal's leg, the heel rising, the weight transferring to the ball of the foot, and then to elongated toes that pressed hard into the dirt. A muzzle, a full extended canine muzzle pushing out from where a human face had been, 6.5 feet. The werewolf stood upright in Bigfoot's grip and bit down on Bigfoot's forearm hard enough to force the hand open. I heard Bigfoot make a sound, not a roar yet, something. Lower, something that came up through my chest before it reached my ears, and Bigfoot pulled the arm back. Blood caught the moonlight, dark but unmistakable. The werewolf dropped the last 2 inches to the ground, and both of them squared off in the silver-lit clearing while I stood at the tree line, not breathing. Should I run now while they're focused on each other, or is moving what gets me noticed? Now what happened next is something I've never even imagined in my life. The werewolf circled left, but Bigfoot didn't circle. Bigfoot stood square, shoulders forward, weight settled, watching the werewolf move the way a man watches a dog he isn't afraid of. I have thought about this a lot since. The way Bigfoot's body language communicated something close to patience. Not hesitation, but patience. Like Bigfoot had done this before, or something close enough to this that the rhythm of it was familiar. The werewolf moved faster, cutting a tighter arc, and then it lunged. Bigfoot swung, a wide backhand, arm coming around like a gate, and it connected with the werewolf's torso with a sound I can only describe as a full-body thud. Not a crack, not a slap, but a dense, low-frequency impact that my phone's microphone turned into a clipping distortion. The werewolf left the ground. It didn't stumble. It flew sideways, 6 feet, 8 feet, hit a fallen log, and went over it, landing in the dirt on the other side. I think that at that moment, I took a step back, because the footage shakes on that part. The werewolf came back up before I finished stepping. If something can take a hit like that and keep moving, what does it take to actually stop it? Low stance, haunches dropped, muzzle forward, that same left-hand arc resuming like the impact had only been a pause. The vocalizations from both of them were constant now, layered into the audio. Bigfoot's at a frequency so low, it blurred into the background noise of the recording, and the werewolf's higher. Sharper, a snarl that sharpened into something almost like a shriek when it rose. The sounds were not like any wildlife vocalization I know from this range. Bears grunt and huff while cougars scream. These sounds were intentional in a way that animal sounds don't feel intentional. They felt communicative, territorial, a declaration repeated on a loop. I remember thinking that the werewolf was not scared, and I remember thinking that Bigfoot likely knew it. The werewolf came in low the second time, targeting Bigfoot's legs, and for a moment I thought it was going to work. Claws raked into Bigfoot's thigh, and the skin there parted. I could see it separate in the footage, a dark line opening across the upper leg, and the werewolf coiled under Bigfoot's center of gravity, trying to drive upward, trying to topple something it couldn't match in weight. The strategy was smart. If the werewolf could get Bigfoot off balance, get those massive legs compromised, the size differential stopped mattering as much. Bigfoot caught it mid-movement, one hand behind the neck, one on the hindquarters, and then Bigfoot lifted and slammed the werewolf into the ground from a height of maybe 3 feet, full body weight behind it, and the impact kicked up a spray of dirt that crossed the frame like smoke. How many hits like that can either of them survive before something finally gives? The camera blurred. I was trying to zoom, and the digital grain just exploded. Pixels breaking apart, the image going to mud for 2 full seconds, while the audio ran clean and clear. And the audio was just the concussive boom of the impact, and then the wet, rapid snap of the werewolf's claws finding purchase on Bigfoot's chest. The werewolf drove upward the instant it hit ground, before the dust settled. Claws raking across Bigfoot's chest in a motion so fast it looked like a single event, rather than 4 or 5 separate tears. I heard the tearing. I thought it was clothing for half a second. A tearing fabric sound. And then I remembered that Bigfoot wasn't wearing anything you could call clothing, and I understood that what I was hearing was skin. Dark liquid ran down Bigfoot's chest and caught the moonlight the same way the arm wound had. Bigfoot made the low sound again, and this time I felt it in my back teeth. The werewolf didn't press the chest advantage. It dropped back into that low circling stance, moving fast, keeping the distance variable, never settling into a rhythm that Bigfoot could read and counter. Why would it pull back instead of finishing the attack unless it's planning something worse? I recognized the behavior from wildlife footage I'd seen of wolf pack tactics. Probe, withdraw, probe somewhere else, except this was one animal, operating alone, and it was smart enough to rotate its attack angles, targeting a new quadrant of Bigfoot's body each time, trying to distribute the damage so no single area could compensate for the others. The thigh, the forearm, the chest. The werewolf was building a map of Bigfoot's injuries. The structure of the fight, such as it was, came apart around this point. The footage shows it. What had been, as much as it could be called anything, a series of exchanges became something more continuous and chaotic, both of them inside each other's reach, and neither willing to create distance. Bigfoot got the werewolf down again, this time pinning it chest first against the ground, with one forearm pressed across the back of its neck, the same geometry as the opening grab, but inverted, and for about 3 seconds, Bigfoot held it. The werewolf's claws dug into the dirt, gouging, and then its neck bent sideways, and those jaws found Bigfoot's shoulder. I cannot fully convey what the werewolf did with those jaws once they were locked in. It shook its head. I swear it wasn't a twitch, but a full, violent lateral shake, the way a dog breaks a rat's neck. Weight and momentum transferred through the bite into Bigfoot's shoulder joint. If that bite lands just a little higher or deeper, does that end Bigfoot right there? Bigfoot roared, full volume, unrestricted, and the microphone just collapsed under it, the audio waveform flatlining into red distortion for a second and a half, and in that second and a half, every bird left the trees within a quarter mile, and even I felt my vision go slightly gray at the edges. At that moment, I was scared for my life, but I also couldn't run away from this bloody spectacle. I had been holding my breath. The werewolf released the shoulder the moment Bigfoot's body recoiled, and for a split second, the two of them separated by maybe 2 feet. Just long enough for me to see the damage on both, the shine of blood on Bigfoot's shoulder and chest and arm, the way the werewolf's right side was tucked slightly tight after the ground slams, and then they closed the gap again and the chaos resumed. If they're already this damaged and still closing distance, how close do they have to get before I'm part of it too? But before we get into that, you need to see this, because we found more Bigfoot incidents just like this. We got files, pictures, evidence, and even footage that never made it online. Things that were taken down, ignored, or completely removed. We gathered everything into one file. If you want to see it, it's in the description. Now back to the story. That was when I understood that neither of them was going to stop. Not from pain, not from exhaustion, not because one of them made the rational calculation that retreat was preferable to continuation. They were both too far in, too committed to the arithmetic of it, and whatever instinct governed this kind of encounter in whatever world these two things actually lived in, that instinct did not include an exit. In one part of the footage, they hit a tree. It wasn't some small sapling. It was a real tree, maybe 6 inches at the base, maybe 8. Beyond, the kind that takes 2 long sessions with a chainsaw to drop, and they hit it together, both bodies slamming into the trunk in a tangle, and it snapped. It started with a sustained groan and then a crack, the root system pulling partly free of the ground on the near side, and the tree came down at an angle across the clearing, branches scraping dirt. Neither of them acknowledged it. The tree came down around them and through them, and they kept going. The werewolf using the falling mass as a momentary prop, getting a leg up on a rolling branch and launching off it back toward Bigfoot's midsection. Bigfoot absorbed it, staggered back half a step, the first half step backward I'd seen from Bigfoot in the entire fight, then planted and drove forward. If Bigfoot is finally being pushed back, does that mean the balance is shifting, or just getting more dangerous for anything nearby? The ground around them was already carved up. I could see the trenches even in the low light, furrows a foot deep where feet had driven hard into the soil looking for traction. The clearing's floor churned into something that looked like a quarry floor, soil and broken root, and kicked stone. The radius of the damage was spreading outward with each exchange, the fight-eating territory consuming the landscape around it. The werewolf flew it in a way that Bigfoot wasn't, got partway up Bigfoot's back, climbed it like terrain. Claws sinking into the fur at the shoulders and neck, rear legs pushing off Bigfoot's lower back for leverage, teeth going for the base of the skull. I remember thinking that if those teeth found what they were looking for, the fight was over in the next second. The reach wasn't right, or Bigfoot moved fast enough. Bigfoot's arm came back blind, fingers finding fur, and the werewolf came off the back and over the shoulder in a single throw, clearing 10, maybe 12 feet before hitting the ground on its side. The impact sounded like a bag of wet cement, dropped from a second-story window. I thought I was watching something die. The werewolf was up in 3 seconds. That was the moment I stopped being able to make predictions about how this ended. If I can't even predict what kills either of them, how am I supposed to predict what keeps me alive? I could see the accumulation now. Bigfoot was bleeding from 3 places that I could identify from my position. The forearm from the initial bite, the chest from the raking counter, the shoulder from the lock and shake. None of them individually would have slowed something that size, but together they were laying a wet shine across Bigfoot's fur that the moonlight caught consistently. The injuries compositing into something that was beginning to matter. The werewolf was compensating. I hadn't noticed it happening in real time, but watching the footage back, I can see the moment the legs started started to favor. After the major ground slam, the right rear leg began carrying slightly less weight, the gait subtly off balance, the rise after impacts fractionally slower than it had been at the start of the fight. If it's already compensating, how much longer can it keep fighting before something gives out completely? Each time the werewolf went down, it took a beat longer to come back up than the time before, a tenth of a second, a quarter of a second, small enough that you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it, accumulating across exchanges into something measurable. They were both breathing loudly enough for the microphone to catch it over everything else. Heavy, rhythmic, the kind of breathing that has nothing voluntary left in it, just the body demanding oxygen, the maximum sustainable rate, and not getting enough. Bigfoot's targeting changed. I don't know how to explain this except to say that it was visible in the footage. Bigfoot stopped going for the center of mass and started going for the head, for the spine. It was very specific and deliberate. The werewolf was reacting to what Bigfoot was doing. Bigfoot was deciding what to do next. The gap between those two things was becoming the whole fight, and both of them could feel it. Bigfoot caught the werewolf mid-lunge, a full frontal catch, both arms locking around the werewolf's torso just below the shoulders, hands meeting behind the werewolf's back. A bear hug, if a bear hug were applied by something that outweighed a grizzly. If it locks in a hold like that, is there any way the werewolf gets out without losing something vital? I heard the sound that followed, and I still don't know exactly what it was. A cracking, dense and organic that could have been ribs under compression, or it could have been branches under the combined weight, as both bodies ground together. Maybe both. The werewolf's claws were at Bigfoot's face, partially, raking. The motion blur in the footage at this range is significant. The camera was struggling, the image smearing into grain, but the hold didn't break. Bigfoot began to squeeze. I could see it in the posture, in the way the arms tightened incrementally, the body mechanics of compression rather than impact, and the werewolf's response was every claw it had going for Bigfoot's face and throat simultaneously. One set caught Bigfoot across the cheek and the side of the jaw. I can see the lines in the footage if I pause at the right frame, and Bigfoot's head turned away from them, but the arms didn't open. Bigfoot drove the werewolf backward 3 steps, and then the motion changed, Bigfoot's head dropping toward the werewolf's shoulder and neck, and the movement that followed was unmistakable for what it was, even through the blur. It was a bite. Bigfoot actually bit down. If Bigfoot is willing to bite too, what line is even left that either of them won't cross to finish this? The werewolf went rigid in the hold for a full second, not struggling, not raking, just completely still. And that stillness was somehow worse than everything that had preceded it, because it read like a system going into shock. I almost stopped recording. I had the phone halfway to my pocket before I realized my hands were still raised and I was still filming. I don't fully understand that decision even now. I just kept going. The werewolf tore free, not a controlled escape, a tearing in both the figurative and literal sense. The werewolf's body torquing hard to the left and ripping out of the hold at whatever cost that extraction required. And what the werewolf left behind in Bigfoot's grip, I am not going to describe in detail, but it was a chunk of flesh. The werewolf hit the dirt on all fours for a moment, not fully upright, sides heaving in short, rapid cycles, and the muzzle lifted, and I could see the labored quality in the breathing even from 40 feet. Something had broken. Something was badly wrong. And then the werewolf stood up and went for Bigfoot's throat. Not the shoulder, not the chest, the throat. A direct straight-line attack, no circling, no feint, just full commitment to a single target in a final total expenditure of whatever reserve the werewolf had been holding back. If this is its final move, does that mean one of them is about to die, or that everything is about to get even more out of control? The werewolf was faster in that moment than it had been for the last several exchanges, which made no biological sense given the accumulation of damage and fatigue, but the footage confirms it. The werewolf was moving at something close to the speed it had shown in those first lunges, burning the absolute last of it in one concentrated surge, and it hit Bigfoot at the throat with enough force that both of them went down together. The camera dipped. The ground filled the frame. Dirt, a crushed branch, one of Bigfoot's feet, a smear of dark moisture in the soil. The audio kept running, and what I heard was a tangle of impact and vocalization and the wet sound of something under tremendous stress, and I realized that I was crouching. I don't know when I crouched. At some point, my body had made that call without consulting me, had processed the threat data in a part of the brain that doesn't file reports, and I was 6 inches lower than I'd been, and my back was against a tree trunk, and I was still filming the dirt. I got the camera back up in time for the last part. I don't know why I call it the last part when I was filming it, because I didn't know it was the last part. I thought this was another exchange in a fight that felt like it had been going on for my entire life, even though the timestamp on the footage puts the whole thing at under 4 minutes. I remember that my hands were shaking badly enough that stabilizing was impossible, and I remember that I was biting the inside of my cheek, and I remember the clearing. If it's only been minutes and I'm already this shaken, how am I going to make the right decision if this turns toward me? Bigfoot got up first. The werewolf was still on the ground, sides heaving, one arm pushing against the soil in a way that wasn't converting to upward motion yet. The muzzle pressed sideways against the dirt, and Bigfoot stood over it and began to work. Downward strike, deliberate, both hands in sequence. Not the wide reactive swings of the first exchanges, but something slower and more purposeful, and if I'm being entirely honest about what I was watching, more terrible. These blows had intention in them. They understood where they were going and what they were meant to accomplish, and they arrived with the full weight of something that has been in this clearing for 4 minutes and is not tired in the way that changes its mind. So this isn't a fight anymore. It's an execution, isn't it? The werewolf's movements became less coordinated after the second or third impact, the arm that had been trying to push upward dropping back, the response to each successive blow coming later and later, the reactive twisting of the torso slowing to something closer to a flinch and then to something that was barely a flinch, an autonomic response with less and less body behind it. Is there anything left in it that can still turn this around, or am I watching the last seconds play out? I was watching the interval between stimulus and response grow wider in real time. Bigfoot registered it. I could see it in the adjustment. Bigfoot slowing slightly, the strikes spacing out, each one more deliberate than the last, the whole sequence becoming methodical in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue and everything to do with precision. Bigfoot dropped to one knee, the mass of it pressing the churned earth down another inch. Both hands went to the werewolf's throat, full body weight applied downward, the same chokehold that had opened the whole encounter, mirrored against the ground now, with nowhere for the werewolf to move, no transformation in process to interrupt it, nothing left to change the equation. I thought about the naked man who had stood at the beginning of this with his feet 6 or 8 inches off the ground, Bigfoot's hand around his throat, convulsing in the moonlight. I thought about how that man was gone in a way that made no anatomical sense, and how the thing on the ground in front of me was what had replaced him. I thought about how none of this was something I had language for, and how I was running out of places to put it. There was no transformation this time. There was nothing to interrupt. Bigfoot pressed down and held. At what point did that man stop existing? And is this the exact moment it becomes final? The werewolf's movement stopped gradually. If I had been hoping for a clean ending on the footage, I didn't get one. It was a slow reduction, each second of motion less than the second before, the body winding down through stages rather than stopping, and I'm not sure I can identify the exact frame where it became stillness rather than exhaustion. I've watched that section of the footage more times than I've watched any other section, and I still can't put my finger on the precise moment. Bigfoot held the position for what the timestamp shows was 17 seconds after the werewolf went still. 17 seconds is a long time when you're counting. Bigfoot released, then stepped back. The Sasquatch stood over the werewolf and watched it for movement, chest rising and falling in long, labored cycles. A slight sway in the stance that wasn't there at the beginning, weight shifting fractionally in a way that read as injury rather than choice. The clearing was silent in a way that clearings aren't when there's been noise. The insects weren't back, the birds weren't back. Everything within earshot had evacuated and hadn't returned yet. I've been in the woods after a gunshot, and after a rock slide, and after a bad equipment accident, and the quiet is the same each time. The world waits to make sure whatever happens is finished. When the entire forest goes quiet like that, does that mean it's truly over, or that something else is about to start? I don't know. At what exact second Bigfoot decided to look up, but the head turned, slow and complete, and I was looking at Bigfoot's face on my phone screen at 40 feet in full moonlight, and Bigfoot was looking at the camera. I had time to understand what was about to happen. I had maybe 2 seconds of that understanding before Bigfoot roared, not the distorted audio clipping roar of the shoulder bite, but something larger, directed, a sound that I felt in my sternum like a physical strike, that I felt in my knees, that I am fairly sure reorganized something in my chest. I was running before it finished. I don't have footage of me running. I have footage of bark and ground and one clear shot of sky that I didn't take on purpose. And then the footage ends because I must have pocketed the phone or dropped it and grabbed it, because the next coherent thing I have is sitting in my truck with the engine running and the heater on and my hands shaking too hard to get the truck into gear.